Welcome to Sincast, presented by Cinemasins.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Sincast. This is Chris Atkinson from Cinemasins, joined as always by the voice of Cinemasins, Jeremy Scott.
Howdy, howdy.
And music video sins writer Barrett Scher.
Hello.
And Barrett, you're going to get us started, right?
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills! We're dicks!
Lord Jesus! Lord Jesus!
Yes. So, as everybody in the universe saw, the final trailer for Captain America Civil War was released. This is being recorded on the 12th, so a couple of days ago. And once again, it is this mishmash of dour, miserable superheroes being miserable in their own pile of miserableness. And you can think about it because I actually wrote down what generally are considered some of the favorite blockbusters or superhero movies. And I came up with things like Avengers, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Star Wars, Deadpool, Superman, something like that, right? They're all enjoyable. They're all people either discovering their new powers or like just using them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then it's shifted, though, into things like Age of Ultron, Dark Knight Rises, which is, we can kind of come back to that one, Iron Man 2 and 3, Dawn of Justice, Civil War, Man of Steel, Winter Soldier. We can go on and on and on and on. It's just they keep getting grittier and grittier and grittier. And I'm wondering if nobody else sees that the ones that are the most enjoyable are the ones that where you're exploring things, where you're equipping, where you're the best Iron Man, the best Avengers, that kind of thing. So anyway, what do you guys think about all?
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think I've always enjoyed when the superheroes are in touch with their powers and love them and are even have an ego about them. Once it starts getting dark, there's not much room to go anywhere else. To me.
Yeah.
So once you've gotten it to this point and it's like, it's a civil war between our superheroes and everything. I don't know where else you take the story after that. And maybe these new Avengers movies that come out or whatever, we'll see. These things will be exciting again. And people will just, they'll just be good superhero movies or whatever. I don't really have any, I really don't have any high hopes for them, actually.
Well, it's just the affect. It's the mood. It's the tone of these things that you got to be fucking miserable.
Yeah.
The whole thing about Batman v Superman. That's why in the final trailer, they showed people kind of enjoying themselves a little more, at least with Eisenberg's character, the Lex Luthor character, instead of the stakes are higher. This time it's personal, that kind of thing. Come on, when you lighten up, that's when things are. Guardians of the Galaxy is another one of those, and it doesn't have to be an origin story. It just the ones where they don't take themselves too seriously, especially in a superhero movie, that are the most enjoyable.
One of the bigger problems I have with that brand new Civil War trailer it has to do with exactly what you're talking about. It's the juxtaposition of the Spider-Man jokey tone after 2 minutes of like all these grizzled, sad, hardened face. I mean, everything's so dour and serious. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the tone fits Spider-Man, but it doesn't seem to fit this movie.
Yeah. And that's probably, you'd have to blame that on the fact that they just got Spider-Man in at the last minute. Of that movie. It wasn't even going to be in there. And then like, well, we got to put Spider-Man in there. And then guess what? You have a movie that in tone is dark and all this other stuff. And then you put Spider-Man in there and it's like, hey, Underoos. And,
well, if that scene plays the way it does in the trailer where Tony says, I've lost my patience, Underoos, and then Spider-Man shows up, how the fuck is Spider-Man going to sway this battle? Right? We got Vision. We've got Scarlet Witch, both of who could melt the planet if they wanted to. But I've had it with this 5-on-5 battle. Here's the difference maker, a teenager.
Here's an aside, too. It sort of, what you just said reminds me of the first Avengers trailer where they had that hero shot of everybody in the rotating camera going around showing everybody. And there's like Hulk and there's Thor and there's Iron Man, all these people with it. And then you got Black Widow cocking a gun. and you're like, what is this going to do against the alien army? A little pea shooter.
Oh, man.
So yeah, exactly. And it looks like also that they decided to go with we have this in the movie fights. Didn't they say something like we'd like to see Spider-Man introduced with the web taking Captain America's shield away from him and everything?
Maybe they did.
And all that. I think they did say something like that. And I'm like, either you stole that or it's just one of those ideas that everybody has in their minds. And
maybe that happens in the comic. I don't know. I never read the Civil War comic. I actually have heard it's terrible. So,
oh well, that's good. It's based on some really strong foundation. This movie that we already aren't thinking highly of is built on this great comic book, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that looked like it could be cool, right? I mean, like the shot of Scarlet Witch, like doing something to Vision, and like there's a lot of good stuff that you can. I mean, look what happened with the first Avengers when somebody.
Black Panther chasing down a freaking motorcycle. That was amazing.
That was awesome. What are his powers, by the way? Because he's like getting shot in the middle of this trailer.
His entire suit, I think, has got that cap shield vibranium in it or whatever.
Okay.
Because he's the king of the country that stuff is mined in or whatever. I just said or whatever to end two back-to-back sentences.
That's okay. No one will notice except you.
Because you remember after the whole 9/11 thing, obviously, and that first print got taken down. Even before then, the first Spider-Man trailers just really made you almost like want to come out of your seat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, things like that. The first Avengers trailer looked like it was a lot more promising than you thought it would be. The first Iron Man trailer. These are, again, they don't have to be origin stories, but like, these are the ones that you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is something I can't wait for,
Well, I think
I feel like I can wait for Civil War.
That's part of why Deadpool did so well, right? I mean, not only is it well made and it's true to the character, but it's the first, I guess Marvel fans are going to say Ant-Man was another one of the fun superhero movies, but I didn't have very much fun with it. But Deadpool, is the first after a long line of dour, sad, depressed heroes that he's just having fun.
It's also there's already some sort of backlash against this too. I mean, and we're talking about a different franchise here, but in Kingsman, it's almost like Matthew Vaughn is speaking through that movie where, Colin Firth says, I kind of prefer the Bonds where they weren't so serious all the time and all that. Yeah. And Kingsman was sort of an answer to this Daniel Craig Bond stuff that's been going on. Even the Daniel Craig, even the last Spectre was an answer to the Daniel Craig Bonds because they started doing all the stupid, innuendos and stuff like that again. But yeah, there's already sort of a backlash to that, just darkness to everything. And we're already kind of tired of the superhero genre as it is. But once it starts, reminding you how depressing life is, then you have another problem on your hand. This is why movies are supposed to be fun.
Yeah, here's a drinking game. Watch Man of Steel and drink every time someone smiles. You'll be able to drive after.
Yeah, exactly. I think the same thing might be said of this Batman versus Superman. I mean, I think in the trailer there's like a couple, and there's like Lex Luthor is smiling once, and then Ben Affleck has that little smirk on his face. But that's probably all we'll get as far as smiling is in that movie. That's our sort of take on the Captain America trailer. Not looking forward to it, but I'm going to watch it when it comes out, and we'll see.
Of course we are.
Yeah, of course we are. I mean, you can complain about it all you want to, but eventually you're just going to watch it and then see if you like it for yourself. Past few movies, though, are not giving me high hopes. The next topic we're going to be talking about here is movie theater stories.
I want to tell you a story.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
And leave your bullshit attitude and baggage at the door, because we don't need it.
Both Jeremy and I, and Barrett for a short time, worked at a movie theater or multiple movie theaters in our time. And Jeremy, I'll let you start on this. We're going to tell some movie theater stories, basically. some things that happened to us that could only happen at a movie theater.
Yeah.
So,
if you've ever worked in a movie theater, you probably have stories like this yourself. And there's some sort of fraternity, I think, particularly among those who spend a long time at the theater or go into management. It's quite a unique job. The first story I wanted to tell is before I ever met you. I was a 20-year-old assistant manager of a 3-screen, and it only opened for the evening shows except for the weekend. I'm going to college at the same time, and it's just me and the other manager, the general manager, and we just basically take turns. And I get a call at like 1 a.m. one night after I'd closed, and it's the police. And they're like, you need to come down to the theater right away. We need somebody with a key. And I lived like 30 miles closer than the general manager. So I drag my ass out of bed. I go to the theater. And long story short, we had locked a woman inside. Now, in my defense, she was drunk and she'd fallen asleep on the floor, like the third row back from the screen. So even somebody going in to make sure that theater's empty after the show is probably not going to see her. So we closed for the night and left, and she's inside. And so the most vivid memory I have is watching the security tape with the police officers in the manager's office, because the first thing she does is she comes out and she stumbles to the door, and it's locked. It's one of those 2-way locked doors. If you don't have a key, you're not getting in or out. And so she can't get out. So then she goes into the bathroom. And we, of course, don't have a camera in the bathroom, but she comes out bloody.
Oh, no.
Because she broke the mirror.
Oh, God.
Then she goes behind concession and tries to get in every single cupboard. She writes, "Help me" in blood on the concession screen. And then she eventually grabs a fire extinguisher and throws it through the glass door. And basically, that's how the cops got involved.
Oh, my God.
It's just
That's
craziest.
To me, it's so weird. That's one of those things where, like, I remember a Mystery Science Theater joke where in one of the movies, like a guy gets, like, I don't know, he's out in the desert or something, and a plane flies by, and one of them's like, it's like, oh my God, thank God you're here. Had to resort to cannibalism. You were only out here for 2 hours. And that's sort of what that reminds me of. It's like a woman like is trapped. I'm going to write this note in blood.
There's obviously no pens around. Or Sharpie.
It was one of the craziest. I mean, it was probably top of my list when we.
She couldn't even get out of an emergency door.
There were emergency doors at the back of every auditorium, and there's an emergency door at the far end of the hall. But she was wasted.
Yeah.
She didn't know what she was doing. She's trying to get out by typing on the concession screen and stealing candy. I mean,
anyway. It's like, I've been locked in the theater. I deserve it.
You get to watch this whole thing on the surveillance video. That's awesome.
I think I'm gonna start off with a winning story. I have plenty of negative ones, but there's very few times that you work at a movie theater and actually feel like a winner by the time the day's over. Most of the time, it's completely the opposite. But I remember when the night that The Dark Knight opened, the Thursday midnight showings, we for about a month or so at this theater that I worked at in Glendale, New York, called Atlas Park. We were trying to figure out how to interlock a lot of prints, because we'd only get like one or two of the big movies, 1-2 prints. The bigger ones, bigger theaters would get multiple prints and didn't have to worry about interlocking. Interlocking is when you take one print and you put it through multiple projectors, and most of the time these things are not set up to do that properly. So when our technicians came in and wired up our interlocks, they only allowed for auditoriums 1 and 2 to do stuff together, 3 and 4 to do stuff together, 5 and 6 to do stuff together, and 7 and 8 to do stuff together. And 7 and 8, they didn't even put rollers in between the two projectors. So if you wanted to interlock the two biggest auditoriums, you had to start inventing ways to get film to go from number 7 to number 8. And man, boy, howdy did we! We figured it out. It was opening weekend of Borat, and like Borat like did like crazy business on that opening weekend. And so there was a point in time where once my manager and first assistant started learning all this interlocking stuff, that they started experimenting with stuff upstairs, and they figured out how to get two completely different auditoriums. They found a way to get the film from those two to those two. And if you can get to those two, that means you can interlock up to 4 if you're doing it right.
You're making me anxious just talking about it.
Yeah. So basically they found a way to put the rollers that were, I think, set up for 5 and 6 to work with between 6 and 8. Now 6 and 8 were back-to-back projectors. They're very close together, but when you work with film, you have to find a way to, if you're going to interlock those two projectors, you got to find a way to get it there. And it's not always the easiest thing to do because you got to get the perfect angles and all this other type of stuff. So 6 and 8, they figured out a way to get the rollers to work on that. And so once you get 6 done, 6 and 8 done, you can do 6 and 5, and then so on and so forth. We figured out 1, 2, 3, 4 pretty easily. But once that was figured out, it was all a matter of just, figuring out how to get the film there and making sure people are up there. But Dark Knight, we had 2 prints of it. And we went through, we would have done all 8 that night because Dark Knight was a huge, movie. And we got the first 4 interlocked, and then we got 1, 2, and 3, except for number 4. We couldn't do number 4 because Mamma Mia was playing and we couldn't cancel it. We asked the home office if we could, and they're like, no, you can't do it. It's in the part of the contract. And these theaters, they get really scared whenever you're talking about canceling movies and stuff. Well, we won't get their big movies down the line if we cancel that movie and they find out and blah, blah, blah. So we had to run Mamma Mia because 2 people actually went to come see it. and so we did 1, 2, and 3, and we did 5, 6, 7, and 8 interlocked. And it, requires 2 people basically. One's got to press start on one of the projectors because they're both connected. So once you press start on one, both of them turn on. And then you have to have somebody start the other set of projectors so that and you have to time it just right because the film has slack and tension. So we did this with Dark Knight, 7 auditoriums, 2 prints. And I don't think I've ever felt like more of a rock star than after doing that. Because it was just amazing to get all that film. I'd never done something that huge before. And yeah, the technician, the head technician, I was telling him about it, he's like, man, I don't want to hear about this. I really don't. He's like, that scares the hell out of me, what you're talking about there. And for sure, if you have anything go wrong with any of the projectors, that means that 4 auditoriums are going to go down. And when I ran it successfully all the way through and everything that night, yeah, there was not a better feeling to be working at a movie theater at the time, because the film just everything went swimmingly and everything just went really well. And it was, we put in like 4,000 people that night. And if it wasn't for the fact of all this stuff coming together and learning a few things here and there, we would have had 2 prints of it, but we would have turned away about 2,000 people as well. So that's one of the things that it's a winning story. It's one of the few winning stories I have. So there you go.
Man, were you at Hollywood when Muppets from Space came out?
Yes.
Because I think we ran, I know I did. I just don't know if you were there at that shift, but I think I ran an interlock over a projector in the middle that was showing something else.
Oh, yeah, you could do that there.
On that 22 through 27 hallway.
Yeah, I was about to say it had to have been there.
But yeah, anytime an interlock goes off without a problem, you feel like a little bit of a rock star. But yeah, you scaled a mountain on that one.
Well, and it's funny too. I always wanted to do this, and I never got a chance to because the logistics of it were just too impossible with the angles of the building. But at Hollywood 27 Theater, all 27 projectors were connected with the interlock button. So if you set everything to interlock and press start on any of the projectors, all 27 would start running. And so
is that what they did with Titanic?
Yeah. I actually wasn't there for Titanic. I remember when the theater opened, Titanic was one of the big movies that was there.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking that I was going to have to do this one day, not all 27, but I was going to have to do one of these weird ones where, like 15, 16, and 17, and at that building, there's all these weird angles. 15 goes down a huge long hallway. 16 goes through a customer walkway, like it's for handicap, it's for wheelchairs.
Yeah.
Stuff. It goes through that, and it goes through it. And 16 has its own room, and 17 has its own room. And I thought that I was going to have to do that with a movie called The Fighting Temptations one night because it was a sneak and it was oversold. And everything, and just ended up we had to turn people down. But I was thinking about doing that with like number 14, which is just outside the door of 16, and opening the two doors and interlocking it through there. But it would have required people ducking under film.
That would have been amazing, though.
Yeah, exactly. And I really wanted to do it. If I had time to do it, I would have probably figured out a way. But
it's crazy how the different chain. You and I both worked for multiple chains too, and how different like the technology or the advancement of it can be. Like when I was working in the late 90s in Illinois, that chain had what was called an endless loop, where it was a set of customized Christie projectors where once you set it up and splice the film's tail back onto the head, you don't ever have to thread it. It just feeds itself back onto this tension system on the middle platter. And they also had these automation machines that you could program right there. And then you could start a movie with a button downstairs by the box office, or you could make it start on its own at a certain time. And then 10 years later, I'm working for Regal, and they don't have any of that crap.
No. The closest thing that I got to that at Regal was when I was going around New York training people for projection and stuff. There was this idea at the time that the unions there wouldn't be union projectionists anymore, and that left a whole bunch of managers who had never been trained to try to be projectionists and everything. So I had to go to all these buildings and start training people. I was the only person around that could do it. But like at one of the theaters that I was at in Brooklyn, like they had these, they started on their own if you timed it just right or whatever. Like it was, you'd thread it up and you're like, okay, I want this to start at 3:15. You punch that into the little automation board and that's what would happen. It would start up. Of course, that led to a lot of problems too. You'd be like, yeah, the movie started, but there's no sound and there's no blah, blah. You have to go all the way down the stairs to go and fix it and everything. But it did have automated starts. It didn't have anything like you were talking about, though, where it basically threaded itself and all that.
Yeah, it was amazing, man. And they only had one. They operated 8 screens on 2 buildings in this town, and they only had one of these things. And it blew my mind that they didn't put more in. But because, yeah, you get the movie in, you build it, you thread it onto that projector, and as long as you don't move it from one house to another, you don't have to touch it for the rest of the week.
I'm sure that there were a couple of issues with it. It's probably an expensive machine is probably one of it. And then the other one was that there was probably, you may not have experienced very many problems, but I bet there were some problems where, you know, it would supposedly be threaded and everything, and you'd start it, and then you know all hell would break loose because nothing was right or something like that.
Yeah, I guess they were relying on people like you guys, right? Like instead of just having the automation and all that stuff, they still needed people who knew what they were doing and knew how to like troubleshoot and things like that, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, we did plenty of that. Chris and I both did plenty of booth manager status and tinkering with projectors and bulbs and probably tinkered with shit I shouldn't have.
Oh yeah, I mean there's some things definitely not in your job description that I have done before as a projection booth manager that, you know, I basically just said if things just screw up, they can blame me. I don't really care. This has to get fixed because we're under the gun or whatever. So anyway, Barrett, you had 3 months at a movie theater, right?
Yeah, I had a brief career at
chew you up and spit you out.
Yeah, really, right? And I have some interesting stories that maybe I can get into in a little bit. They're more like specific, not necessarily to Just happened while I was at a movie theater. But the movie theater, for everybody listening that isn't aware of Nashville, there's this beautiful, huge Art Deco neon movie theater called the Hollywood 27. It has 27 theaters right off one of the main highways and everything. I think we all worked there, right? At one point in time?
Yep.
Yeah, that's where Chris and I met.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was there right after high school in summer of 1998. And my job was, and I was coming out of high school. I was a young whippersnapper. I thought I was smart and everything, going off to college. And here I am, making at the time, I think like $4.75 an hour, something like that. I was working under, some real characters like my shift manager. When she wanted a signature, she would always ask for my John Henry. And that drove me crazy, man. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna bite my tongue this whole time. But anyway, so I worked as an usher and as a concession stand worker, and it was a beautiful time to see movies in the summer of '98. That was when Armageddon came out. That's when something called Mary came out. But the thing that sticks with me most about that position was the food itself, and having to do like midnight shows for like Armageddon and all that crazy stuff, and just the grossness of the food, yet somehow becoming appealing after a while. That you've been on your feet for so long that you're just like, yeah, man, I'm going to get some nachos. I don't care that I just poured that gelatinous shit out of a jar into this electrified hot plate. I feel like that's probably a good option for me right now.
That cheese does eventually become acceptable, right? And then,
yes, it does.
And there's something about the freedom of because almost all the theaters I ever worked at, all employees could have popcorn for free and drinks for free.
Yeah, man. And
at one of the ones I worked at, you could have nachos and cheese for free. And that might have just been me being a bad GM, but I don't remember. So I ate a lot of really nasty food that just became acceptable because it was free.
But you didn't eat the hot dogs, right?
No, I know enough. I've actually got one of my stories on here about the hot dogs.
I totally ate the hot dogs, man. Are you serious? Yeah, I totally ate the hot dogs. And when I was working in projection, especially towards the time where digital started coming in, and a lot of the times my job was just to make sure all the digital movies were being built, quote unquote, correctly, and like getting movies to the proper auditoriums and stuff like that. Sometimes you'd have a lot of downtime. And they're like, man, I don't want to go to anywhere and get anything to eat right now. And there's only one thing that's really substantive down in the concession stand. There's no, popcorn and candy ain't going to fill you up. So I would always go and get the hot dog, especially since it was an employee discount for 2 for $1 and all that type of stuff. So I went and got them, and I threw some ketchup on them, and I ate them, and they were delicious.
Those were the days, man, because now I went to see Deadpool, and I looked at the concession menu, and I almost had a seizure. They sell so much shit now.
Yeah,
pizza,
the same thing.
burgers, and onion rings. I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I never had to do any of this crap.
I saw Deadpool downtown in Chicago, right on the lake at this AMC, or right on the river. And it's the fanciest theater I think I've ever been in. And they had a wine bar right outside of the of the theater. And I was like, and these people were like eating popcorn and drinking Merlot. Wow. I was like, that's probably a cool thing, but I've never tried that.
What a strange combination. That's just, oh my God.
I know when I drink wine, I have to have popcorn.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds like awful. Really, it sounds really awful. Jeremy, do you have another story for us?
Sure, I'll tell a story from Hollywood 27, actually.
Okay.
But I don't think you were there at the time. I think this was when you were with the other company, or maybe even in New York. But one of the things I love about the Hollywood 27, if you've ever been there, and I guess 2 listeners maybe have, it had this huge domed ceiling in the lobby with these shiny metal slats. Well, when you become a manager, you find out that in the manager's office, there's this little tiny door. And when you open it up, It walks out onto this catwalk. And you can stand out there, and the manager at the time would go out there and smoke cigarettes and look down on the lobby and just keep an eye on. You can see concession and box office and customer service, and it's just kind of fun to creepily people watch. But one day I'm in the manager's office. I was the first assistant at the time, and I'm at the desk talking to one of the other managers. So there was a couple female managers that were office managers, basically. And the distinct sound of a gun goes off.
Oh my God.
The door from the catwalk pops open, and the GM goes with his eyes as wide as I've ever seen them. Was that a gun? And I go, I think it was. And he bolts. He's out the manager's door, which I'm standing next to before I can even get out the door. We get down there. Long story short, this man came in and checked his gun at customer service. So he bought a ticket, walked in, and walked up to the customer service lady, who was 60-something, and said, I need to check my gun. And in the process of handing it to her, it went off.
Oh, my God.
And one of the guys from box office who was up there got a piece of shrapnel that hit his back. Two pieces of bullet ended up over in the arcade. And my absolute favorite thing about the entire story was she had done it before. She had checked this guy's gun before, and left it in the customer service. She said, "I've done it a couple times. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that."
Oh my God!
Shit!
Oh jeez!
Did she fire it or did he?
What?
Did he fire it or did she?
No, it misfired. It was like, I think he was trying to clear I don't know anything about guns. I think he was trying to clear the round from the chamber, and in the process, it fired. He was a really old dude. Between the two of them, they just decided that the social rules were such that when you go to a place, you check your gun.
Yeah, you sure do. Oh my God. Ugh. That's so scary. Like that story it easily could have been tragedy. I mean, it's, we're talking about it. It's hilarious because nobody died.
Right.
But man, I mean, that so easily could have been worse.
It could have been a dead person, and I wouldn't be telling it in this context. Yeah.
Oh, hell no. Oh my God.
Another real quick gun story about Hollywood is I was working the floor and I got called up to customer service because a customer was angry. So I go up there and it's this guy and his wife, and they have a little 4-year-old kid with them. And he's just bitching me out because he's pointing at this dude in line at concession. The concessions lines were long. This was back when the theater was really busy. And this dude has just got a gun sitting on his waist. And this guy's all mad about his kid. Shouldn't have to be in a place where this guy's got a gun. Well, this is Tennessee, right? So there are certain people who can carry if you have a carry permit. And so I went up to the guy. Turns out he's an off-duty cop, and he's got all the permits he needs. He shows it to me. I say, all right, have a good night, sir. And there's literally nothing I can do about it at this point. And so I'm trying to assuage this man and his wife as they're walking down the 1 through 10 hallway, all the way down to that one at the far left. And the whole time he's cussing me and yelling at me about this terrible environment and yada, yada, and his kids shouldn't be exposed to it. And I just keep apologizing and telling him have a good night. And then I watch them walk into Scary Movie with a 4-year-old.
Oh, my God. I used to do this thing in projection when I was about to start some like super hard R-rated movie. If somebody came in with like a gaggle of kids into that movie, I would always call over the radio like, "Hey guys, let's put the kids in the backseat of the car. We're gonna go see Texas Chainsaw Massacre today." And of course, that guy would go to Scary Movie with his kid. The whole time he's worried about a freaking gun and that a guy is licensed to carry. All right, let's take you into this horrible movie for 4-year-olds.
I mean, I walked away from that not really feeling very bad anymore. I was like, all right, well, that guy's just an asshole.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of assholes, the next story Jeremy knows really well.
I can't wait. It's on my list. I'm so glad you're telling it.
Okay. Now, it takes a lot of unusual circumstances for something like this to happen. The very first thing is that I was working a projection shift with another guy. We used to have Hollywood. You'd have 2 projectionists. One would run what was called the small side, which had 13 projectors in it, and the other person would run the quote-unquote big side, which had 14. And the guy I was working with that day came in, shouldn't have come into work. He was super sick, like just ridiculously sick. You could see it on his face and his body and everything that he shouldn't be here. So I was like, "Are you sure I can do all 27 by myself if you want to?" And he's like, no, man, I got this. I was like, okay. I was like, well, we'll give you the small side because you're, obviously sick. So I'm going over to my side, and I'm threading movies up, and I think we're getting to the point of starting them. It's like 12 to 12:15. It's the opening of the day, and I get a call over the radio that says that number 6, which was playing the Chris O'Donnell movie The Bachelor at the time, was that the sound wasn't working. Now, back in the day of that theater at Hollywood 27, had these horrible amplifiers that, like, the switches on them started to go bad. So, like, so at night, people would turn off these switches off and on, off and on, and off and on. And over the years, those switches just went out. And the reason why you couldn't just turn off the breaker is that if you turned it back on, it could either blow the amp, or it would put it into the breaker would be locked out or whatever. So you had to turn off each amp before you turned off the breaker. So those switches got broken after a while. And so sometimes you'd have people who would forget that, and they would turn off the breaker with the amps still on. And when you turned them on in the next day, there would be breakers that were tripped. So the guy who was working over there, typically a really good projectionist, was super sick and everything. I was like, all right, I'm going to go over there and see what the problem is, because it's probably because he's sick and he can't hear the radio or something. Because we used to have horrible radios too. That was another thing. So I went over to number 6, and I couldn't notice the problem right away, but I did notice that the other projectionist we had all these little blue trash cans lined around the projectors. He was vomiting into one of them.
Oh gosh.
And I was like, oh my God. And so I started to assess the situation on number 6, and I looked out there, and I think it was in the opening credits of the movie. But there was only like one guy in the auditorium. Now, either everybody who was watching that movie came out of the auditorium, or it was just because it was The Bachelor and there was one person in there. There was one guy in there, and he was at the door, and at number 6, you can actually face people at the window. It's not high enough up that you can have interaction with customers if you want to. Obviously I didn't want to in this situation. I opened up the little sliding door, and the guy was as nice as could be right off the bat. He said, oh man, I can't hear anything and blah, blah, blah. And I was just wondering if you could rewind it. It was actually common type of thing to hear people ask if you could rewind it, because, we lived in the age of Blockbuster, and everybody, it's just on a tape. All you have to do is rewind it. Press rewind. It's good. But no, you can't do that. Now, there were techniques that you could do to rewind, quote unquote, a movie, but I was not prepared to do that, especially considering my one partner over here was not feeling well. And I had my own projectors to start, and we were in the middle of like starting all these movies and everything. There's like a ton of things going on all at once. So, I tell him I can't rewind it. I'm sorry. We'll have to just get your money back or something like that. And I was like, I said, so look, I'll try to figure it out, and we'll get this up as soon as possible. It's only in the opening credits anyway. He goes, you mean I'm going to have to miss all this part of the movie and everything? And I was like, man, I'm afraid so, but look, I'll try to get this going. And he goes, hey man, it ain't about look, it's about getting it right and all that. And that's when the customer becomes, I was never a huge believer in that customer is always right thing. I think that once you cross the line, that you start becoming less of a customer and more of a person who's taking things personally. So the guy said that it's not about look, it's about getting it right and all that. And I said, look, man, I'm just going to get it. I'm going to get it fixed. That's all I can do. And I slammed the window, and, I am almost immediately found the problem, because it was that amplifier problem. And whoever shut off the power the previous night before was somebody who didn't do it that often. And they turned off the breaker, and the amplifiers were all tripped and all this other type of stuff. So all it took was me to stop the movie and blah, blah, blah. But before that happened, I noticed the guy was still standing there at the door, at the window, and he was giving that come hither, motion, like, come here, I'm not done with you, basically. And without opening the door or anything like that, opening the window or anything, I just flipped him off and called him a motherfucker. I said, you motherfucker.
Oh my god!
I knew I was in trouble. I was like, all right. I stopped. I actually got the projector back up and running and everything. I went back and started doing my side.
You started the movie back?
Yeah, started the movie back up. I started doing my stuff like nothing had ever happened. Just waiting for the call. And finally, the girl at customer service was like, Chris? I was like, yep, go ahead. And she's like, could you come down here for a second? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I came downstairs and the guy was there and he was, hot. He was just hot. And he's like, hey man, you the one calling me a son of a bitch of blah, blah, blah. And I was sitting there going, well, I called you a motherfucker. I was sitting there thinking that, but he thought I said son of a bitch. So I was like, yeah, I was the guy who said that. And he goes, hey man, why don't you take it? Why don't we take it outside? We'll figure out who's got the best words, blah, 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 that nonsense. And I was like, dude, I'm done with you. I thought you were being very rude to me. So, and I'm sorry. I didn't say sorry, but, I said, I thought you were being very rude to me. It's like, oh, so I'm the rude person. I was like, yeah, that's pretty much it. He's like, I'm going to have your job, man. You're going to have your job. And that guy never complained about me to anybody, to any higher form of person at that company. Nobody came out, and apparently that guy still kept coming to the movies too. So it apparently got home, and he was just like, I'm sure his wife or somebody got to him was like, you know what, you can be kind of a dick sometimes. So maybe he was justified. Now I look back on this story and I realized that I went way over the line. There's no really excusing it. It was just something I felt at 22 years old that I had the right to do to somebody. But yeah, that happened.
So it's one of my favorite stories ever. God,
Fantastic.
Oh man, you survived in the Hollywood booth by not pissing Chris off, and only a couple people did it because they were lazy, terrible projectionists, and they got rightfully yelled at.
Yeah, that was my number one thing up there, was that you didn't have a hard job. And so, like, especially later on, when I started to get really concerned about people scratching prints and stuff like that, that's when I would just blow gaskets on people because it's easy. It's just an easy thing, just an easy check of your projector, and you don't ever scratch a print. And what you would do, you'd go through all this trouble. Sometimes you'd have a weekend where you'd like, man, we did great. We didn't scratch one print. It was great. And then like, I'd come back that Tuesday and somebody had scratched 4 or 5 prints. And I used to get really upset about that type of stuff. It was very intense as a booth manager.
Oh, you got stories, Barrett?
I got one more, like a brief one, where I was sexually assaulted on top of a Pontiac.
Ooh,
okay, that sounds appropriate.
Yeah, just a little thing, because there was a funny moment in there. So I worked with a woman in concessions that was about my age. I was about 18, 19. And she was very, very nice. And at the time, I was a younger, probably better looking guy. Like, she was very attracted to me. And, I thought she was nice, but when that kind of thing. And so we, kind of flirted back and forth, but it wasn't anything all that much. And so one night, like right outside of there where the emergency exit is, there's the parking lot goes back around there. So I was back there at the time smoking a cigarette, and she came out and said, "I really want to make this happen." I said, "Well, I don't know about this. This really isn't my thing." And as we were talking, like, I was kind of moving backwards, and I found myself like kind of up against like a Trans Am, like a Pontiac. And so I was kind of like sitting on the hood, just being like, all right, so I'm going to head out, that kind of thing. And she gets right on top of me and basically starts pushing me onto the hood and says, this is going to happen. And I was thinking, okay, well, I guess this is probably going to happen at this point, all right. So just about then, as I'm getting kind of thrust up against like the windshield almost, one of the ushers comes out of the movie theater. This is after everything is closed, to actually smoke a joint.
Oh,
and
nice.
So he comes out. Yeah. So he comes out in his vest and everything, and it lights up a joint and everything. So there was this moment where all of our eyes met, where as soon as he lit up and took the first drag, like, he looked over at us, and then I looked at him, and then she looked at him, and he looked at her. And she turns around and she says, "The fuck you doing here?" And he bolts out of there so quickly, leaves the joint behind. I used the opportunity to kind of be like, "Okay, see you later." All right. And, that was the end of that.
But there's a lot of sex happening at movie theaters. Like if there's a room in the movie theater, someone's had sex in it.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
It's just maybe the case for all like restaurants and businesses. I don't know. But for theaters, it's definitely true.
And there's really I don't know if there's really an interesting story about stumbling upon those things. It's just that they happen. It happens all the time. There's especially I think the funniest thing about people having sex in the theater is that a couple who knows that they're going to do it will always buy that movie that nobody goes to, and it's usually a kid's movie. There's really some sort of weird, ironic subtext to that. But they go to they always go at a 9 o'clock or something, and they're like, "I'd like to go see Madagascar at 9:30. Nobody's going to be watching that movie tonight." And so they go in there, and of course, they're usually the only people in that auditorium, and they'll usually use that time wisely, I guess.
Have you seen that? One of the ideas for this topic of conversation was the craziest stuff that you've seen either as an usher or being in a theater or as a movie goer. Have you seen actual intercourse go on? Because I've seen it.
Yeah. One of my stories here is as a manager walking into the men's room down by 17, 9 p.m. show, guy and girl having sex on the counter. And, get the security officers down there. Yeah, counter the bathroom. We're open for business, right? It's probably a Wednesday. We're not super busy or something. So we're open. Anybody could have walked in there. And they didn't even have the decency to go in a stall. So we get the security officers down there. And at this point in time, the security officers we were using were off-duty Metro PD officers. So they at least knew what they were doing, some regards there. Turns out the guy's 17, girl is 12.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. And mom of the 12-year-old doesn't want to press charges. They love him. He's a good boyfriend.
Oh, what? My God. Oh, my God. That's just an awful, that's truly awful. And I have the only other time I remember, there's of all the times that I remember sex stories or whatever, the one that sticks out is the one where there was 2 14-year-olds or whatever in there in an auditorium doing it with people in the auditorium too. Jeez. And one of a former worker was in that auditorium and was texting us and was like, there's definitely some sex going on in the back of this auditorium. And that girl, those people look like they're 14. And sure enough, once somebody went in there, it wasn't me, went in there to kick them out. There was somebody else that went in there and kicked them out, and they walked out, and I was looking at them as they went out the door, and I was like, "Holy crap! Those are some young people right there." Jeez. And it's pretty awful.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I need to apologize now because the story's gross, and then you kind of asked for fun sex stories, and I just took us straight to a dark place.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's always the ones of the consenting adults that you see. That happens all the time. There's not really anything interesting. I saw it once. I remember in the movie Invincible, because there was nobody in there. The only thing that I remember about it, the reason why I remember this one so much is that. What I used to do as a projectionist is if I started a movie and there was nobody in there and there was no ticket sold, I'd usually just stop it or I would at least turn off the bulb for the night just so that it wouldn't waste the bulb. And Invincible, I remember there was tickets sold for it, so I was like, okay. So I looked over and there was nobody in the auditorium when I looked down in the auditorium. So I opened up the window and poked my head in, and that's when I saw it. It was just, then it was full on, just going at it. And I was like, okay, well, closing this window now.
Were they in the back?
They were in the back. Yeah, they were in the middle of the auditorium, but then they were gone. So I was like, well, maybe they left. Maybe they didn't like this movie, because that happens all the time.
Oh yeah.
And so I was just checking to see if they were all gone and everything. And I was going to give it another 5 to 10 minutes if there weren't anybody in there. To turn it off, and then but I popped my head in, and there it was. They were just going at it.
I'm trying to picture this. So they're on the back row, and your head just appears above them.
No, they were to the right in the back. Okay. So, but even if they were directly below, they probably still wouldn't have seen me, because a lot of times people just don't notice that change in pressure in the room. And so you open up a window and like for me, like when I'd be in a movie theater and I'd be watching a movie by myself and somebody was looking for me and they opened up the window, always could feel it.
Oh yeah.
Always. And so like some people just never do. You could yell to people sometimes and they don't even know where it's coming from. So they were oblivious. They were completely entangled. And
after 6 minutes of watching them, then you went back into
That's
work,
right. I had to. I watched them 6 minutes, and this was before I had a smartphone, so I could not record it. So it was unfortunate. That was a bad day.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I could give one more.
Yeah.
And I've got plenty more, but Jeremy and I knew a guy named Russell at Hollywood 27. The guy was one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. But there was one day we were all in the office. I don't think you were there, Jeremy, but it was Russell and there was like a whole bunch of other managers and everything. So there was a point where somebody walked in and had some sort of message to say or whatever, and Russell, being Russell, was like, pretended like he was angry about the message, and he picks up the phone. He's like, "I'm going to call the blah 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 about this," and whatever, and he pushes the phone and whatever, and it's like, ha ha ha, Russell's funny, and so then we proceeded after that person left to sit there and talk real trash about the manager. We were talking all sorts of trash about the manager that was there at the time, and deservedly so, because yes. Jeremy has one of the worst stories I've ever heard, one of the worst racist stories I've ever heard with that manager. But we were sitting there just talking all this trash and everything. Now, our phones are hooked up to the intercom, so if you hit the right button, it hits like an intercom button where it goes to like concessions and stuff like that. Luckily, it wasn't like broadcast the whole auditorium, the whole theater. But we were sitting there because Russell had touched the phone. He had accidentally hit the intercom button, and we're sitting there trashing the manager and everything, going over, and like Laura calls up from one of the concession stands, and she's like, you guys are, everybody can hear you guys, right? And, like, and Russell's like, oh yeah, we were just joking, blah, 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 blah. We knew the phone was on and everything like that. We were just sitting there like just bad mouthing the manager. I don't think the manager was there that night too. That was the reason why we were so freely just, blah, blah, blah or whatever. But yeah, it was one of those things where, Russell pulled it off like, oh yeah, we knew. We just turned it on so that you could hear it, blah, blah, blah.
See, I have this sneaking suspicion that it's like The Prestige, and he's just playing this crazy persona off 24/7 so that if that kind of thing happens, he can just claim that as just, I was just joking, and everybody will believe it because he's always saying stupid shit.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't have any doubt that would be some sort of long con game in his arsenal there. Like, I'll just pretend like I'm always like this. But it was, I mean, the circumstances by which all that happened couldn't have been, more serendipitous.
We may have to cut this because it's pretty vulgar, but my favorite Russell moment was the night you and me and him watched Jeepers Creepers, which we all enjoyed. And then we watched that movie with Julia Stiles and and then when they're having sex, do you remember this? Russell said he's giving her a back rub from the inside.
Yeah, I remember that. Oh my god! You always had to pay attention with Russell because he would slip things in just like it was. It's kind of like I don't know if you guys were big fans of 30 Rock. Like a lot of times you would watch 30 Rock and you would just get lulled into this sense of like, oh, they're just kind of talking normally. And then they throw a joke in just completely out of nowhere that you were like, oh, I have to rewind this. I wasn't even expecting that. And that's how Russell would be when he would just talk in everyday life. And a lot of times you just have to sit there and just like, oh, okay, he's saying that. Oh, what did you say? We have plenty more. We're going to see if this is a popular topic, and we'll come back to it because there are plenty more to talk about. movie theater stories, because that's just it's a unique place to work, and you get a unique subset of customers and people you work with.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get on to our Q&A. And Jeremy, do we have a couple of good ones today?
I have a question.
Just one more thing.
I want the truth.
I know more than you.
Yeah, I got some good shit. Actually, I'm going to have trouble picking this week, so at least I think it's good. Since we didn't really touch on it when we talked about the new Civil War trailer, people want to know what our stance is on Spider-Man's costume. I think they could put any costume on screen and somebody's going to say it's true to such and such era comic, as this is apparently true to some early 60s era Spider-Man costume or something. I don't really, at the end of the day, I don't really care what his costume looks like. I care that he looks fake as hell in this trailer because it's not finished, whatever they're doing to him. And that sort of annoyed me. But what did you guys think of the suit?
That looks kind of like a mess, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's fine. The suit color, whoever, it's like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers getting like a new shade of copper or something like that. Like, do we really care that much? Like, they're going to show up and they're going to like assault each other for 4 hours. So yeah, it's the same thing. I don't care, but yeah, it did look really shitty in the trailer itself, though.
What do we make of these eyes?
I don't know. They kind of look like Deadpool eyes a little bit to me.
But I mean, let alone the physics of how they work. Like, is he controlling them with his muscles or something? It looks a little weird, is all I'm saying. And it didn't look like Deadpool's looked real, and this didn't look real.
Nothing about that looked real, actually.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that's my main thing too. I mean, I'm with you guys. Is that the CGI on it? Now, we did sort of remark about this long ago when that first Spider-Man came out, when they didn't have the effects finished in that it looked horrible. Now you look at it today and it's still like, oh well, that's unfortunate in some instances. But I mean, they'll make it look better, but I'm just against in general that type of the CGI where it just looks fake and it just like, that's not a real guy there. I'm out of it, you know?
Yeah. And why don't you just save him for the movie? You know, like, I was kind of disappointed they even showed him at all, and then the fact that he doesn't appear to be finished. Anyway, so I'm not a big fan, but I don't really care that much about the outfit.
But you know what? This is probably something else that, a lot of times I will critique commercials, and we did that in one of the earlier podcasts or whatever. And a lot of times, it's just fun to make fun of the plots of some of these commercials and everything. But the main focus of a commercial is just to announce something is going on, so that you know about it. It doesn't really have anything to do with is there plot holes and stuff like that. And like this is more about telling everybody on Earth who doesn't know that Spider-Man is actually in this movie.
But did anybody not know that?
I'm sure that there are people out there. I guarantee you, in fact, there were people out there who did not know that. Okay. Because I dealt with those type of people in the theater all the time. They would always be like, "Oh, and did you hear they're putting Spider-Man in this thing?" And and it's like, "Oh yeah, I heard about it a year ago." But yeah, there are a lot of people who are like that. So yeah, it sort of tells people, and it sort of, if you were just kind of worried about Spider-Man showing up or whatever, they give him something cool, quote unquote, to do. So that it's like, oh, he's in that. It's going to be awesome, whatever. So yeah, I don't think they really care how it looks right now, because now they just basically are announcing Spider-Man's in this movie.
All right. So let's find another question here. They'd like us to talk about the Ghostbusters trailer.
Okay.
Which I'm predicting is going to be three of us not saying very many good things.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I woke up the morning that they, came out with it, and I immediately went over to watch it. And I was like, okay. I mean, all right. I didn't have much to think about. I didn't know that it was getting that kind of a backlash. I really just sort of felt, not one way or the other about it. What about you guys?
Oh man, the biggest crime is it's not funny. I think I tweeted the movie might be funny, but this trailer is not funny. And I think even Kevin Smith said on his podcast recently that whoever cut the trailer should be fired.
Oh, wow.
Or something along those lines. Maybe he just towed that line. But I mean, I guess there's a lot of backlash about race stuff and the character Leslie Jones is playing being sort of a cliche and being the only one that's not a scientist. And I'm not a woman and I'm not black, so it's hard for me to really talk about those topics. I just thought it was unfunny. I mean, whether or not the character saying, "Oh, hell no," is black or white, it's not a funny line. Why are we still doing that? It was barely funny when Will Smith was doing it 12 years ago.
I know. I was about to say, this is they've actually even made fun of that type of thing in some of the parody movies that have come out, where it's, you have a black character who says, "Oh, hell no," and all this other type of stuff. They've even made fun of that. So yeah, it's almost like they're still trying to appeal to that lowest common denominator on these little things like that. Because there's still a lot of people who find that funny for whatever reason. And
I thought it was a reboot. So why did they open with the 30 years ago, 4 scientists, such and such, and now today it's happening again, or what?
No, it's not a reboot. It's the same world with them in it 30 years later.
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
Because I believe they were going to, in the mini incarnations of Ghostbusters 3. It was supposed to be all of them back, and then I think they just decided, well, they've gotten too old to do this now, blah blah blah, and then they just like, well, let's just keep it in the modern day, and let's just make them all female. Now, you're right, and when you have people like Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig and Kate McKinnon and all these people who are really funny, and they can't come up with anything funny, then that is a problem for sure. And then they should probably come out with a new trailer soon for that.
Well, yeah, it's been a long time since I saw the original trailer, but I kind of got the idea that the original trailer for the original Ghostbusters was also not all that exciting, certainly commensurate with the movie, right? I mean, it seems like it's appealing to more of like, slapstick kids, younger people that may not be already emotionally attached to this in the first place. So, yeah, it certainly was not impressive, and it definitely was not funny.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I had just, like I said, I had a different sort of reaction. It wasn't like, oh, that doesn't look funny or whatever. It was just like, okay, that's coming out. And whether or not it's funny or not, a lot of times trailers can just lie to you. A lot of times you see a trailer and they put all the funny stuff in the trailer, and you watch it and it's just like, everything that was funny was in that trailer.
Yeah.
And this one, maybe they want to hold back. Maybe I don't know what they did.
All right. Let's do, just for the sake of discussion, scariest movie moment. Because I think it obviously depends on what age I was when I saw the movie, because if we're going to adjust for age inflation, then the answer is Jaws, because I saw Jaws as way too young and I wouldn't take baths for months and my mom was mad at me. But as an adult, I don't find that moment as scary as I do the chest busting scene in Alien. When that thing comes out, it's frightening. It's gross. It still chills me to the bone. But what moments scare you guys the most?
I had one of those moments with Chris, actually. It was way back before when you could do literal viral marketing for the Blair Witch Project. We ended up, Chris, was that the first time that you had seen it over at our friend's place, Mike's place?
Well, I actually was the one who brought that tape.
You brought it, but you watched it before?
But I had watched it before, and Russell, coming up again, is the one who gave it to me. And it was a longer version of it too. I think it was like a 2-hour version of Blair Witch Project.
Yeah. Well, we watched it, an old VHS tape, and in this darkened house that was in a terrible neighborhood, and you'd see shadows like passing by the whole time. And say what you will about the Blair Witch Project and what it birthed, but It was a scary movie when you saw it, especially if you didn't really have the backstory and you didn't have the background and everything. And the last shot in the Blair Witch Project really creeped me out.
Yeah.
And it's a guy standing in the corner, and it's not really that scary at all. But in context, it gave you the chills, and I thought it was great.
Well, and that's how I experienced it. It had sort of this, like, way before it was in theaters, it had this, like, underground, pass-around VHS kind of life.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's always one person in that viewing party you showed it to who then goes and shows it to a bunch of other people. And, in that context, it was creepy as hell.
Yeah. And you know, you're talking about the viral marketing of it. It's one of the first, it's like the grandfathers of the, you know, incoming internet age we started to live in. And it was a movie that, you know, they made it seem like it was real. Everything was real. Like they had a website with where the murders happened and all these different things. Now, in the back of your head, when you first saw this, you were like, oh, this is not real. I mean, come on. They couldn't make a movie and come out with it to a mass audience that actually showed people's murders. There's no way that they could do that. And nobody in the families would do that. But it did make it, I mean, the marketing for it really made it look, you know, like, oh, that's actually really did happen. They actually sent the footage to the studio and blah, blah, blah. There were a lot of people who were taken in by that. But that underground life of it was where Blair Witch was really at its best. When it became a big movie, it sort of lost all that because there was a lot of people who were, you know, they just didn't like the shaky cam. And I had a story about that too. The shaky cam of Blair Witch Project and everything turned a lot of people off. So they had a huge opening weekend, and then it fell tremendously by the next week.
Still got a sequel.
Yeah, still got a sequel, and the sequel is, oh my God, just terrible. But for me, the scariest moment, I guess there's a couple that I like. In Halloween, there's a point where, and this isn't like a super scary moment, but it's one of those things that is really effective and they don't do in horror movies much anymore, is when the camera is moving around and you can see him in the corner in the background somewhere. And then the camera will move away and then it kind of comes back, but it's not like a purposeful move. Like a lot of horror movies would do that. Oh, he was there and now he's not. But Halloween would do it where the camera movement seemed incidental. So, you know, the camera would move slightly and you'd see Michael Myers in the corner of a frame, and then it would come back and you know, show the babysitter or whatever, and then it would come back and then, oh, he's not there now. That's always been effective to me, and I don't know why more horror movies haven't really followed that model, because I think, you know, now everybody favors that, you know, blood and gore jump scare stuff. But there was a jump scare in the movie The Descent. I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Descent.
I have.
Oh, yeah.
There's a jump scare in that movie that's really effective because all the women are in that dark cavern and they're like shining lights around, and the light finally hits one spot where there's this, like, one of the monster dudes is right behind her when the light shows up on him or whatever. And it always got me. It was always a really good jump scare in a movie.
I was thinking about this the other day, but we should earmark a topic for the future where we talk about jump scares that are good, jump scares that work.
Yes.
'Cause they're not all bad. At least it didn't start out that way.
Yeah, when it's just for the sake of a scare of some sort, that's usually when it's bad, and when it doesn't make any sense to the movie. I mean, there's so many of those where they just out of nowhere they'll throw something in, and it's like, well, that has no consequences at all.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't like. But in that one, that means it's on. Everything's changing for these women who just went into the caverns or whatever. It's completely. It's a really scary jump scare. That's the Sincast for this Monday. We're still going to SoundCloud, right, to make comments?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're going to, so everybody out there who wants to comment, whether we're doing good or bad or whatever you want to say, go to SoundCloud and give us some comments. We do this every Monday. As for today, we're signing off. This is Chris, Jeremy, and Barrett. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to check out Cinemasins on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Tumblr. And be sure to visit cinemasins.com.
Also want to give a shout out to a program that we've been using since we've all been in different areas since we've been recording this podcast, a program called Zencaster. So if you're interested, go to Zencaster, that's ZENCASTR.com.
I hope the listeners like it like 10% as much as we do, because then we can just keep doing it.